Hey, good afternoon, everybody. It's been a much longer pause than I expected it to be, and I apologize about that, but I think we're ready to kind of get back with the Bible reading plan again. Um, my thoughts on that are I want to keep plugging away, but I don't necessarily feel like we need to be in a hurry about it. I know the time is valuable for all of us, and so we want to make sure that we're doing due diligence with the text that we read for the times that we get together. And so if it takes us 18 months, it takes us 18 months. I'm not going to worry about that. So anyway, to that end, if you recall, we were going to look at Job 1 to 5, I think, but I'm going to look at 1 to 3 today. Once I got into the first three chapters, that was about as big a chunk as I wanted to take at that time. So today I want to give you some thoughts of some of my thoughts about Job chapters 1 to 3. And as we begin, I also want to encourage you to share your thoughts. I know some of you have, and that's been very much appreciated. To be honest with you, I get as much out of them as the other listeners do too. So just for my benefit, from my standpoint, I really would like to hear what your thoughts are as well. So now, if you remember, we've been through how far did we get in Genesis? About 8 chapters, somewhere around there. But anyway, now we're going to do Job, and we're going to we'll read the whole book of Job now. That's how the chronological order is going to work. So we get an idea of when Job would have been living, would have been about the time of Noah, because we just got finished with Noah in the Genesis readings, and now we're into Job. And so Job is a contemporary, living about the same time, and in chronological order, this is how the Bible would go. So I think all of us probably would name the wealth of Job as being pretty striking, pretty dramatic. I mean, uh, if we think in today's numbers, I don't know what the equivalent would be, but for Job to have, what was it here? I was going to come back here, 500 yoke of oxen. So that means he had 1,000 oxen. 500 female donkeys. The female donkeys would have been much more valuable than males because, well, one, they rode better. I don't know why that is, but I guess that's true. They were a better riding animal. They could provide offspring, and then they could provide milk. So a number of reasons why a female donkey would have been much more valuable than a male donkey. And it says he had 7,000 sheep in addition to 3,000 camels. And then, of course, it said many servants. Well, if you think about all the livestock that Job had, it would have taken a whole bunch of servants. So I think just from the possession standpoint, we've got to come away with the idea that Job was a very wealthy man. I think it says here in the text that he was the greatest in the region, the greatest man in the region. Or maybe that was a commentary I was reading, but he certainly was a man of great reputation, probably well known. People looked up to him. That's who he was at this moment as we begin Job. And then I think most of us would say, well, in addition to his material wealth, he certainly was blessed with a family, right? 3 daughters and 7 sons. So if you think about 3 daughters, three is a biblical number, seven, number of completeness, biblical number, and then 10, 3 plus 7 is 10, 10 children altogether. Look at how the numbers are starting to play out and to show themselves that obviously Job was a man who was tremendously blessed by the Lord. And then, of course, we jump into Job and we hear about his wealth, and then all of a sudden, Satan's roaming around, and it seems like he and God make a deal, and we think, why would God do that? Why would God throw Job under the bus like he does? But he does. Oh, let me back up because there was one more point I wanted to make about Job's family before I talk about Satan and his role here. I think it's significant for us to pay attention, and I'm going to point this out in chapter 2 as well. It's significant for us to pay attention that how does a parent think about or care for his children? Now, it's easy to know that, when your child is an infant or in elementary school, junior high, even high school, how we as parents watch over them. We take seriously um, our role as caretakers, right? And then they get out and perhaps they go to college and then we give them a good foundation, and then we help their wings to grow so that they can fly. And that is not the progression. Usually the children leave the nest, so to speak. And that's what's happened with Job and his children. But we notice, though, that Job still cares for his children. They were adults. We don't know if they were married or not, but they were adults. They were living on their own. And he still cares about them. Do you notice that? Because they apparently had a great relationship because they gathered together for parties, and we don't know what kind of party they were at in the text here. But he cared about them to the degree that he was afraid that if they had sinned while they were in a party, that he offered a sacrifice for each one of them to repent of their sins on their behalf. So a father never stops caring about or worrying about his children, always trying to look out for their best welfare. Well, then we go into Satan and his attack, and like I said, it seems like God throws Job under the bus. But it's interesting because I don't think God would have done that had he, in fact, I know he wouldn't have done it had he not known the outcome. But, he says that Job is blameless and that he's righteous. Probably the most blameless and righteous man he knows. And isn't that interesting after coming off of Noah and the flood, where God wiped away all of the human inhabitants of the earth except those 8 on the ark because they were sinners. And here we have now, immediately on the heels of that, Job shows up and he's blameless and upright. And that's by God's definition. I think if God says that about you, you're in pretty good shape, don't you think? So God says, hey, have you checked out Job? Because obviously Satan is out there looking for somebody that he can influence. Like 1 Peter 5 says, he's prowling like a roaring lion looking for somebody to devour. And so here he is looking for somebody, and God says, hey, think about Job. And so he says, yeah, go ahead. You can tempt, or you can deal with Job on your terms. But then he says, I got to get back here. He says, but you cannot stretch out your hand. Only against him do not stretch out your hand, it says in verse 12. So he can take his possessions, and we see that that's what happens, but he can't harm Job. Okay? At least not at this point. Not at this point yet. So then we go to 2, and the angels come back, and Satan's with him again, and God says, hey, what have you been doing? I've been roaming around, and he says, well, what about Job, the blameless, upright? And Satan thinks that if he can take away his possessions, that Job will curse God, and he didn't. He didn't. And he thinks, well, if he can afflict Job physically, he will certainly turn his back on God. And he doesn't. But did you notice one of the possessions he doesn't take away is his wife? Job doesn't touch Satan doesn't touch Job's wife. And you kind of wonder, right? Because he took away his children. Why not his wife? And one wonders if his wife wasn't an instrument of Satan. Because she says in chapter 2, Job, are you still, holding on to your righteousness? Just curse God and die. Well, that certainly isn't the kind of helpmeet somebody needs, right? But you notice that Job doesn't. So just as Job watches and cares for his children, well, Job also does for his wife, because he says later on in the chapter, he says, should we receive only good from God and not bad? So in other words, he's saying, hey, we have to expect all kinds of things because Job was blameless and righteous, but he wasn't sinless. And so he recognized his sinfulness and realized that God is a just God and no sin goes unpunished. So he knew that it was possible that God could punish him for his sins. But he doesn't get after his wife and say, "Get out of here, you're no help to me," which he could have probably rightfully said, but he didn't. So Job exhibits his care in his relationships, first for his children and then for his wife. So even as patient as Job is in the first two chapters, we come into chapter 3, and now we begin to sense perhaps that that this is getting to Job. So first of all, his possessions, all of those mighty possessions, those many possessions have gone away, have been stripped from him, and now he's been afflicted with this terrible disease. What was it? It was some sort of skin disorder that caused boils or eruptions. Some commentators, I think most of them, think that it was a condition called elephantiasis, which made your skin probably more pale gray and maybe even scaly, lumpy, kind of like an elephant's skin would be. But obviously the open the sores, the pus-filled boils must have greatly disrupted Job's life, because in order for him to find any kind of relief, he had to scrape them with the pottery shard, a broken piece of pottery. I kind of know what that's like. Maybe you do too. If you get a mosquito bite, what do? You scratch it. For me, it's a chigger bite. The only way that I feel like I can get rid of a chigger bite if I just scratch it until I finally scratch it raw, and then of course it bleeds a little bit and forms a scab, but it quits itching. It may hurt, but that's better than the itch. So I think maybe I kind of get an idea of where Job was coming from on that. Obviously not near to that extent. But in chapter 3 now, Job begins to really lament his condition. In fact, it is so bad that he says right away in the opening verse, he says, after this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. He wished that he had never been born. And in verse 12, it's interesting, he says, why did the knees receive me? And you might wonder what that meant. Back in the day, the father would take his newborn and place him on his knees. And you can imagine a father and his newborn, and maybe he's holding him on his knees and maybe bouncing him a little bit. But that was actually done purposely, because it was an indication for all to see that the father had accepted and welcomed the newborn into the family. So that's why he says, why did the knees receive me? Because at this moment he's saying, I wish I'd never been born. My life is miserable. My possessions are gone. I'm physically extremely ill, and I'm not sure why God is allowing this to happen. But he does not curse God. He doesn't curse him. He doesn't blame God. He just is lamenting his condition. And well, I think honestly, if you and I have been sick to any degree, sometimes we can feel pretty rotten, can't we? I personally, I don't think I've gotten to the point where I've cursed the day that I was born, but I've felt pretty bad at times, and you don't have much to give at that point. So we kind of get a little bit of why Job feels the way that he does. So those are my thoughts and brief takeaways. As always, there's always so much more in a text that one could highlight. And in fact, you're going to highlight something different than I do, probably. Some of the same, some of the different. That's what makes these kinds of activities so fun, is because we get to share that, and perhaps I'll point out something that you didn't recognize, and you'll point out something to me that I didn't recognize. And that's the blessing of doing this together. All right, so that's it for today. And I'm going to encourage you to read then Job 4 to 7, because this has to do with the first friend of Job, Eliphaz, and his speech to Job. And so we'll discuss that section, chapters 4 to 7, the next time we get together. So I'm happy to be back with you, and I think we've got this Facebook thing figured out. I never did know why I got kicked off, but it seems to be working now, and we're good with that. But we'll run with it, and so give me your thoughts today. And you know what? If something comes to your mind about something we read in Genesis, put it on in the comments. We're always happy to hear it. And I wish you God's peace today as we continue our read through the Bible plan with Job 1 to 3 today. Looking forward to Job 4 to 7 the next time.